Mesdames et messieurs, ladies and gentlemen, bonsoir. I'm Julie Lessauss, cultural attaché at the French Embassy, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to La Maison Française for tonight's screening of Paris Noir, African American in a City of Light by Joan and David Burke. This event opens the World War I Remembrance Week, organized by the French Embassy from November 5th, so today, to November 14, which features several events, screening, concerts, and talks. As we are commemorating the centennial of the end of the First World War, it is important to remember that among the over 4 million American soldiers that crossed the Atlantic between 1917 and 1918, 400,000 were African Americans. It is this story that will be told by the extraordinary exhibition that will open next year at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. The curator of the exhibit, Kravatsky Salter, will join us in a minute to deliver some opening remarks and tell us more about this project. Going back to the Paris Noir documentary that you all will be watching tonight, you will see that the First World War was a real starting point for the African American presence in France, as several generations of African American artists and intellectuals would later travel to and settle in the City of Light. This remarkable migration of African American pioneers to France contributed to the recognition of an African American presence in the international cultural scene, as well as the emergence of a new black culture in France. And the documentary recounts the impact both there and French culture had on each other. After the screening, we will have the pleasure to welcome Julia Browne, founder of the Spirit Tours and co-producer of the documentary, for a Q&A that will be moderated by Kravatsky Salter. I'll thank them so much for being with us tonight. It is a great honor. I wish you a good screening and look forward for the discussion and the reception that will follow. Now, let me give the floor to Dr. Kravatsky Salter, Guest Associate Curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Julie, and good evening to set. My name is Kravatsky Salter, and I'm a Guest Associate Curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where I have the pleasure to be the curator of the inaugural Military Gallery exhibition. We are pleased to be here tonight as co-presenters of this film. And one of the reasons that we are co-presenters is because we have been in collaboration with the French Embassy, the French Council in New York, and importantly, the 1418 French Centenary Mission in Paris, France. And they are helping us get artifacts to put on this exhibition. And I'll talk about the exhibition in a second. But those three institutions and locations in Paris, DC, and New York are instrumental in helping us pull together some artifacts from 5 institutions in France. The Musée de la Guerre in Meaux, the Musée des Armées in Paris, the Contemporary Museum in Paris, the Chateau Palace out in Blancourt, and the Histoire de la Guerre in Browne. Those 5 institutions are working with us to help us bring artifacts. So about 35% or a little more of the artifacts that you will see on exhibition next year at the National Museum of African American History and Culture comes from those 5 institutions. So it's very key in the collaboration that we are doing. The sponsors of that exhibition currently right now are 2, Nationwide Foundation and Altria Group are the 2 sponsors that we have at this point. The exhibition is going to be an overarching exhibition. It's going to have 7 parts to it. The first part is Safe for Democracy. That's how we're going to set the stage and open the exhibition. The second part of the exhibition will be Black Life at the Dawn of War. So we're going to look at the state of African Americans in America a couple of decades before the exhibition begins into the war when America enters in 1917. The third part of the exhibition, which is key for this collaboration, is going to be a global war. So we're going to set the stage for the entire war. And then The middle part, which is the heart of the exhibition, part 4, is going to be war at home and abroad, where we're going to talk about the participation of those 400,000 African American soldiers, almost 200,000 of those who deploy overseas, but not only the soldiers, it will be about the civilians, about the women, about the mothers, about everyone who participated at home or abroad, whether they were in uniform or not. Because the title of the exhibition is the African American Experience during World War I, not the African American military experience, so that's key. And then the 5th part of the exhibition will be after the war. So the film that you're going to see tonight, we are going to continue to talk about that portion of the experience in war. And then the last part of the exhibition is going to kind of, take us into the legacy. Maybe some creeping towards civil rights and how that World War I set the stage for African Americans and Americans leading into the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And the last thing I want to say is we also are hosting a series of 8 public programs in relationship to the centenary of World War I. We have already held 4, and we have 4 more to go, and they are in May and November. The first one was in November of 2016. I almost said 1916. I always say we opened in 1916, but it's 2016. And the 5th public program will be this Friday night. And so each and every one of you are invited to come. So if you're not familiar with the website, www.nmaahc for National Museum of African American History and Culture.si.edu. Go to calendar, go to events, and click on to get a pass. And I don't know if Miss Stephanie Neal is here tonight, but she is the executive producer of the 369th Experience. And so that will be our public program for Friday night. It will be a jazz concert inspired by World War I music, played by students, and this is the part where I really need my notes, I don't want to forget it. Students from HBCUs around the country, at least 9 HBCUs, Florida A&M University, Howard University, Jackson State University, Morgan State University, North Carolina Central University, Prairie View A&M University, Southern A&M College, Texas Southern University, and Texas Tech University. So please come out and join us on Friday night, and without any further ado, I think we'll begin the screening.
When African Americans finally got the chance to explore the world in the early part of the 20th century, most headed for La Belle France. Who were these early transatlantic explorers, and what brought them to France? And what did they discover there?
We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to kick this off so we can get as many questions from the audience as possible. That is about the 4th or 5th time I have seen that film, and it never gets old. I mean, it's a great film.
And I've seen it about it. I don't know how many times I've seen it. I've seen it 50 times at least, the film. And every time I see it, I see something else.
Right. Okay, so I have 3 questions, but I'm going to pare it down to 1. I'm going to ask 1 question, and then I'm going to kick it over to the audience. So, Joanne Burke, David Burke, and Julia Browne.
What a team.
Tell me about those 3 individuals and how this came about, and also talk a little bit about the spirit, the walking spirit of Paris, Black Paris. Full disclosure, a week ago Friday, I had the opportunity to be with Julia on one of those. So talk about those 3 individuals, you being one of them.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Salter. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. And I would like to thank the French Embassy for inviting us here, and for Dr. Salter for making this happen as well. Thank you. All right, so how did we get started with this? Let me tell you about Joanne and David Burke. They are, of course, 2 dynamic, excellent, veteran filmmakers. They live in Paris, but they Started out in New York. Joanne was a film editor for many of the very big documentary and fiction filmmakers for about 20 years. David was a journalist for 60 Minutes, you know that program. And in 1983, they decided to go to Paris just to take a break. I guess New York just gets to be that much. And so they decided they'd go to Paris for a year. They took their son with them, and they never went back. They've been back ever since. They've been there ever since. So they went to Paris, they fell in love with Paris, but the thing was they couldn't keep doing film work and journalism as they did because they weren't French speaking at all. So they had to sort of scale back and start looking at it from a different way. So they started making films together. They started making films of which the subject were people that they don't see much in the film world, like people from Southeast Asia, people from Africa, people from African, and mostly women actually. So this has become a sort of a pet. Not a pet, but a passion for them. But one thing about David and Joanne is that they grew up in the jazz era, so in the 1940s and 50s, and so they grew up listening to jazz on the radio. So when they were in Paris, they didn't know initially about the African American community, but they went to jazz clubs because jazz, that's what you do in Paris. I mean, it's a place where jazz is sometimes on every corner of the street. So they were going to jazz clubs, and then they started to learn about the African American community there and the history, and they dug a little further, but they didn't really know anybody, but they started to make this film, which is, is anybody here in film? Or anything like that? But when you're in film or you're a writer, you might just get a little bug in your head, and then you just take out the camera and you start going with it. You don't know where it's going to take you, but it takes you somewhere, and this is where this took them. They just started filming and filming people, and then they met me, you saw me young and fresh in this film here. They met me because they were looking for somebody to lead them and show them some things around Paris, and I had created this company called Walking the Spirit Tours. And what I did, and I had been studying at the Sorbonne, and my professor turned out to be an expert in the subject, the late Michel Fabre. And so I was learning about this, and I started showing people around what I had learned. And I wasn't an expert or anything, but it was just a passion of mine. I had a full-time job, so it was something I did on the weekends. So I had these little cue cards, and people would say, "Can you show us a bit of this? Show us what you've learned." And I just walk around and say, "Yeah, well, this was here, and this was here." And then they'd send, they'd say, "Oh, my cousin's coming, my brother's coming. Can you show it to us?" And I'd been living in Paris maybe 5 years by then, and so it just kind of happened naturally, very organically. But for me, it was, like I said, I'd been in Paris for a couple years. I had a child by then, and I was married to a Frenchman. But I was a foreigner in Paris, and Paris didn't mean a whole lot. It was a beautiful city and all, of course, but I didn't have a real personal connection. But when I learned about this history there, and disclosure, I'm Canadian, I'm not American, but the history is all of our history, right? So when I started learning about the history, I started to feel a place in the city, and that I could actually contribute something to the city, instead of just kind of existing, doing the same thing everybody does. You you get on the metro, you go to work, you come home, you go to grocery shopping on the way. So finally I had, there was a real purpose to what I was doing, and that's what got me going here, and that's what led me to meet Joanne and David, and that's what's led me, that was 1994 when I started doing that. And so 24 years later, I'm still doing that. So my company is called Walking the Spirit Tours, Black Paris and Beyond, and I've created a series of walking tours that take you through, the Lower Pigalle area, through the Latin Quarter, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, down in Montparnasse. But we also have a bus tour so we can cover more ground, so we can go and see where the Alexandre Dumas statues are in the 17th district. We can just see a lot more. So we've got those, and I also do, since I ended up living in Paris for 12 years, and then before that I lived in Aix-en-Provence for a year and a half doing a year abroad program. And just, you want to share, people want to come to Paris, but they don't really know. And so, there's nothing I like more than, being a bit of a know-it-all. Say, well, I can help you do that. I can show you that. So I started doing customized itineraries. So that I also do that as well.
And it is fascinating. So I know we have mics out on the floor. Does anyone have a question for Julia Browne?
The film focused on World War I, but the American military was segregated through the end of World War II. Can you comment on the role of African American soldiers during World War II as well?
From what I know, in World War II, there was, they weren't, I'm not sure, were they segregated as well? Were they? Okay. All right, I'm more familiar with World War I. So what I have seen is footage and heard stories of in the battlefields area that many of the soldiers did what they did in the First World War I, like laborers, but they also had roles as truck drivers and getting supplies here and there that was necessary. And actually one of those has actually been made into a stamp by the US Post. But as far as what their actual role was, I can't exactly say. You could probably say more.
During World War II, the military was still segregated. It wasn't until 1948 when Executive Order 9981 was passed on paper, but it actually took the Korean War about 5 or 6 years later before the military was integrated. And as Julia said, so in World War I, 80% of the African Americans who served in World War I served as labor, workers in uniform. In World War II, of course, you have the Tuskegee Airmen, you have 3 African-American tank battalions, you have an infantry regiment that serves in the Pacific, and we can go on and on, but it is a segregated military, but integration is beginning to creep in. Any other questions?
I know the gist of the movie was entertainers. Were there any black elected officials? Did they have enough of a were they able to start kind of a movement where black people were able to be elected during that time or after World War II?
Elected officials in France? French or African American? Not that I know of. No, they wouldn't have been. Not in that sense. They needed, first of all, they needed to have the language. And there was no political role for them at that point. There would have been people that had created organizations that were pushing towards a more involvement of African Americans, but that would have been something like W.B. Du Bois, for example, creating, putting together the conference in 1919 and then 1921 and further on. But as far as elected officials, no. I mean. Oh, the children. Okay, those, so you're referring to the children of those who have become. Let me think about that one. I know that, I'm trying to think of Henry O'Tanner's son had a role in, if it wasn't government, it was an official role. I can't honestly think of anybody else that I know of. Do you know? Yeah, but he was an African American.
Well, okay, so your question for African American and or French. So there was a Senegalese named Blaise Diagne who was elected in France, but for African Americans, not in Europe. But the first African American elected to an office since Reconstruction was Oscar Dupree in Chicago in 1929. So as Julia said, during that period, there were no elected officials to give any political clout in that arena, if you will. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is more present day. You still live in Paris, and second part, you feel that blacks in Paris are facing aggression post-Brexit, like people of color in London are right now. People have left London, moved back to France, but I was wondering if it's any better there.
What is the part about the Brexit, please?
So, post-Brexit, there's a lot more aggression towards people of color in London and the UK area. And I was wondering, and some of those people have moved to Paris trying to escape that, but I was just wondering, since Europe is changing, is that aggression also being heaped upon people of color in Paris now, or if it's still a much better place to be?
As far as African American goes, it is still an easier place to be. There are actually people that are moving from the United States to France to get away from the climate at the moment here. Now, as far as Brits coming from Britain to France, that I don't know if what they're facing at the moment, but for the Afro-French, those who have African, Caribbean, or other French-speaking background, there has long been, as Jake explained, there's long been an aggression towards them. But the difference that's happening now is that there is pushback. So, where there was, up until the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, there was no official organ, there was no particular newspaper or any way for people to talk about racism, to report racism, because it was happening. But it wasn't until there was an incident, there was an event in 2005. You may have heard about these two young boys that were killed. They were they were being chased by the police. They ended up going into an electricity company called EDF. They had a station out there and they ran into it, and unfortunately they got electrocuted. And so that set off major riots in Paris, but in the suburbs where most of those young people came from. And since then, there has been an outspokenness of the black identity and do they belong in France and why they're not treated as French. So that came out of that, but actually the conversation the first kind of thing just really started out was with the 1998 World Cup, when the motto became Blanc, Black, Beurre, so white, black, and Arab. And so there was that recognition that this national team was made up of 3 different nationalities, and oh, hey, it's not just the traditional French anymore that need to be counted. We need to count these other people that are French who were born here. And so when I say there's pushback, there's political groups that are formed, but there are a lot of people that you see them on talk shows. They're very vocal about what is their place in France and how they are being regarded as black and French or just French. Can they be Afro and French, or do they have to be French, or do they have to be one or the other? So that's a lot of what's going on now. But if you have a chance to see, if you go to film festivals that show black films, or black themed films around the world, this is where you're going to see some of these films, and they're absolutely fantastic. Like one of them that I've seen recently is called Noir. Has anybody seen that movie? No. If you get it, I think they have an English language version coming out now. But there is a lot going on right now. So yes, there is aggression, but it's a good thing because it's something that has to be dealt with, and finally now, because it's children. It's the children of the people that came over in the 50s and 60s. It's their children, and anyway, yeah.
I think we have a question over here to my left.
Yes, thank you. It's an excellent film. I was wondering if it's going to be shown anywhere else on public television in this country or at some universities, because there are many, many people who would profit from seeing this. Having said that, I was a bit disappointed. I don't know if it's because of editing, but I thought James Baldwin, having lived as long as he did, and being a prolific writer and thinker would have said something on some of the issues touched on in the latter part of the film.
All right, to answer the first part of your question, is the film going to be seen anywhere else? We've shown this film in DC at least 3 times now, and every time we have a screening, there's more and more people coming out, and we realize there's still many, many people who haven't seen it and who could benefit from seeing it. So I take the film to different places. I was in Montreal last week, the week before I was in Paris, and we just take it around to all different places. We also take it to, now we have a French version now, thanks to the French Embassy in France, who was able to finance the subtitling of the film in French. I lost my train. Now, disappointed about James Baldwin. Now, the scope of this film was supposed to be from World War I, from the first appearance or influence of African American culture in France to the end of the Second World War. And so the second part, with them coming back in the 50s and 60s, is kind of like a teaser to what the next film could be about. Because if we had continued on, the film would have been like 2 hours long. And that wasn't the scope of this, because this is a very big story, and there's a lot in it. So, I mean, this is dense enough as it is. So if we'd added more, it would have been quite a bit. So there's room now with this, the ending here, for someone else. And, no filmmakers here, but maybe, get a film program going. Somebody else to take that and do the next part. And it's true that James Baldwin, what James Baldwin's had to say, and especially with the film, the popularity of the film all over the world, I Am Not Your Negro, that in itself is a film by itself. By the way, have you seen the film, what's it called? It's about James Baldwin, The Price of the Ticket. Have you seen that film? If you're really interested in James Baldwin and you'd like to see more of his life in Paris, it's called The Price of the Ticket, and you can find it easily online. Now, why this film isn't on PBS yet or anything like that, this film is self-financed. So we didn't have big grants or anything like that to make the film, which meant that we didn't have enough money to buy the broadcast rights. So we have rights to show it in private screenings like this, but we didn't have the finances to take it to the next level. So if anybody wants to contribute, we're more than happy to do it. But a bit of news there is that you probably want to see the film again, right? Yes. So we do have the films for sale, but the better news is that we're going to launch a streaming site. And we're going to launch that November 11th, which of course is significant. And so if you'd like to know more about it, or be advised when and where and how to stream it, streaming meaning that you can access the film for like two days, or you can buy it online, like access to it online for as long as we have it up. So if you want to find out more about that, there are postcards out in the reception area that have the Paris Noir image on, and on the back of it I have a copy of it here to show you, and we also have it has a description of the film on it, so you can pick that up and take that home as a reminder. But it looks like, thank you very much. It looks like this. This is the little postcard you can pick up on your way out. A souvenir, put it on your fridge, keep it forever. So you'll find information about how to contact us on here. So we love to get comments back, so please comment back to us on how you like the film. And again, out in the reception area, you'll find a turquoise-colored moleskin book. So if you could write your comments, we'll pass them on to David and Joanne, and they'll be able to see what your appreciation is. And again, if you'd like to know more about it, just leave us a note out there, fill out the form, and we'll let you know more about it.
Okay, is there another question? Yes, in the back.
Hi. First of all, that was a wonderful film, so thank you for that, and congratulations on making a wonderful film. I'm particularly interested in the musicians that were featured in the film. And when I think about the evolution of popular music in the United States, say over the 20th century, from ragtime to to blues and jazz and ultimately to rock and roll. One of the really interesting parts of that story is the way music from the black community and music from white communities interacted with each other, the way the artists borrowed from each other, and the way certain very brave musicians would openly collaborate with each other. And it got me to thinking as I was watching the film that was, as you pointed out, a much freer, there was much more opportunity for that in the Paris that you described. And I'm kind of curious on the influence that the French musicians may have had on the evolution of the jazz musicians that were coming to Paris. You saw it really clearly when you showed some of the art. You could see the influence of Impressionism, of Expressionism, of Cubism on the actual art that the African American artists were creating. But I'm curious about the influence, perhaps, of more traditional French culture and French music on the African American musicians who were there, who then may have brought that back with them to the United States in ways that maybe that I don't know and many people don't know. French culture influenced American music in that way.
Okay. French, if I get this right, French musicians may have had some influence and impact on the African American jazz scene.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thanks. From the start, there wasn't a lot of influence. The African Americans were playing their music. There wasn't really room to take in, and they didn't really play at the first part alongside the French musicians. So the French musicians kind of sat out while the African Americans played because they didn't know how to play it, and club owners wanted this type of music. As they went along, whether there was influence, I honestly can't say that I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about the first time that there was, where the French musicians came into play was those that helped spread the word, but by their appreciation, by their knowledge, by the creation of the jazz hot movement in the 1930s, by writing the French, by starting the French jazz magazine. I think that's where their influence came in. People like Django Reinhardt were big at the time, and Stefan Grappelli, and they all found their influence and played that forward within the French music scene. But I'm thinking that there was, in the 1950s, Sidney Bechet started working with the French musicians, and he was the first one, with Claude Luther at the time. And Kenny Clark also started working with French musicians. There you started to having a little bit more of a crossover or more influence. And then there was international artists that for example, Kenny Clark started introducing more international artists to his band. So then you start with jazz going out further than well beyond the African American limits or audience or receptors. But I'm thinking it wasn't until the 60s and 70s, even 50s, 60s, and 70s that they actually even started playing together.
Julie, you want to take one more question? I see. Do you have a question, sir? Okay, no point.
Well, I think we're dancing around the idea of the black expatriates, and a lot have been written on the black expatriates, but not all of us did the Sidney Bechet thing. So guys like Kid Ory, who played with Louis Armstrong, Kid Ory died in Honolulu, and Jelly Roll Morton or Ferdinand Moe, died in Los Angeles, and others that have some language skills, like maybe Charlie Mingus, who came up in Nogales, died in Cuernavaca, I think. So I think a lot of us went where we could. France gave us many opportunities, but in thinking about people like Kid Ory, who was born in Laplace, just outside of New Orleans, could have done the Sidney Bechet thing, but went to Honolulu instead. I think that's interesting to explore. I don't know. You have thoughts on that?
So the globalism of jazz and jazz being extended into other areas. What can I say about that? It was it was the kind of music that was accessible and not easily picked up, but it was a universal language by that time. So it was music that any nationality could take it and blend their own music, their own musical culture and traditions, and make it their own. And that was the kind of thing that jazz was. It was, it's such an adaptable type of music that it just lent itself that way, and that was a thing with black music as well. Other types of black music, like rap and hip hop, it did the same thing. It's almost as if jazz opened a door to certain self-expression, and then it was up to other people, other nationalities, to take it forward and spread it forward through their own construct and their own vision and their own experiences.
And with that segue, the doors are open for the reception.
Thank you so much for coming.
We do have ATM. We do? Yeah. Okay.